Alexander Sterling, a man of immense fortune and profound sorrow, returned to the lakeside estate earlier than expected, the gravel crunching beneath the tires of his car under a weeping English sky. He entered the grand foyer, a cavernous space of stone and shadow, and what he witnessed there nearly stopped his heart. The Hermes briefcase, crafted from the finest leather and worth a small fortune, slipped from Alexander's trembling fingers. It plummeted through the heavy, stagnant air, colliding with the polished mahogany floorboards with a dull, resonant thud that echoed like a judge's gavel. Yet, in the vastness of that drawing room, no one seemed to register the sound. Even Alexander himself barely heard it. His entire universe, his fractured reality, had frozen into a tableau so impossible, so heartbreakingly beautiful, that his legs threatened to buckle beneath him. Alexander had to grip the oak frame of the entrance, his knuckles turning white, to keep from falling to his knees as his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. What he was seeing defied every diagnosis, every cold medical report from Harley Street, and every sleepless night he had endured for the past 2 long gray years. There, bathed in the rare golden light of a late afternoon sun breaking through the clouds, light that poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the dark waters of the lake, were they. Grace, the new housekeeper he had hired only 3 weeks prior, was not cleaning in the conventional sense. She wore her yellow gloves, yes, and her pristine blue uniform with the white apron, but she was engaged in an act of rebellion that no other nanny or employee had dared to attempt in this gloomy mausoleum of a home. She was sliding across the freshly waxed floor in her socks, utilizing the surface as a makeshift skating rink. The mop transformed into the lance of an imaginary knight. But it was not this display of whimsy that had Alexander on the verge of fainting. What stole the very breath from his lungs was the small, precious burden Grace carried upon her shoulders. Lily, his 4-year-old daughter. The same Lily who had not uttered a single syllable, not a whimper, and certainly not a laugh, since the day her mother was lowered into the cold earth. The same girl whom the most esteemed psychologists in Europe, from Vienna to London, had diagnosed with severe post-traumatic selective mutism, warning Alexander that she might never emotionally connect with the world again. And yet, there was Lily. She was clinging with her chubby little hands to Grace's dark, messy bun, her head thrown back in abandon, and a sound, crystalline, pure, and vibrant, filled the room. Laughter. Lily was laughing. It was not a shy, tentative smile. It was a deep, thunderous belly laugh, an explosion of childish joy that Alexander had forgotten existed in this world. "Faster, horsey, faster!" cried Grace, spinning with a grace that defied her humble station, causing her blue dress to bloom outward like a flower in spring. Alexander felt the tears, hot and urgent, welling in his eyes. He was paralyzed. He was terrified to blink, fearing that if he did, he would wake up in his lonely bed to find this was all a cruel hallucination, born of work-induced exhaustion. He had arrived 2 hours before his scheduled business trip to surprise Victoria, his fiancée, but fate had granted him an infinitely greater surprise. Grace paused for a moment, panting, her face illuminated by a genuine affection that transcended any contractual obligation. "See, Princess?" Grace said, her voice soft and musical, possessing a sedative quality that seemed capable of taming beasts and soothing broken souls. "The dust monster cannot reach us if we are faster than the wind." Lily clapped her hands, her blue eyes shining with a light that had been extinguished for 730 days. "Again," the little girl whispered. Alexander let out a stifled sob. His daughter had spoken. It was a hoarse whisper from disuse, rasping like dry leaves, but it was a word. 2 years of sepulchral silence, of useless therapies, of expensive toys left unopened in their boxes, had been shattered by a simple housekeeper with rubber gloves and a willing heart. He remembered the last time he tried to play with Lily. She had simply stood there, staring at the inert wall like an empty porcelain doll. And now he watched as Grace, a woman who barely received a pittance in wages, achieved the impossible simply by lowering herself to Lily's level, by becoming a child herself. The scene possessed a sacred intimacy. Grace did not treat her as the heiress to the Sterling fortune. She treated her like a child who needed to be saved from her own sadness. Alexander noticed how Grace's hands firmly and securely held Lily's little legs, protecting her at every turn, instinctively prioritizing her safety while returning her childhood to her. Alexander took a tentative step forward, intending to enter, to embrace them both, to offer this woman the world for giving his daughter her life back. But before his shoe could touch the Persian rug, the sharp, aggressive staccato of high heels striking the marble of the hallway behind him shattered the spell like a mirror crashing to the floor. What on earth is going on here? The shriek was so sharp and sudden it seemed to rend the calm evening air. Victoria burst into the drawing room like a hurricane of icy fury. Her designer dress, impeccable and stiff, contrasted violently with the domestic warmth that Grace and Lily had created seconds before. The effect was immediate and devastating. Lily's laughter stopped dead as if someone had severed a vocal cord. The girl's body went rigid on Grace's shoulders, and that miraculous light in her eyes was extinguished, instantly replaced by a familiar, haunting terror. Grace, for her part, braked with impressive dexterity to prevent the girl from falling, turning towards the source of the scream, her eyes wide, her face draining of color under her white cap. "Miss Victoria," Grace exclaimed, lowering Lily with extreme delicacy, ensuring her feet touched the ground firmly before releasing her. We were just—" "Shut up," bellowed Victoria, advancing with her index finger pointed like a loaded weapon. "You are irresponsible. You could have killed her. Look at this mess. Wet floors, you running about like a savage with a child on top of you. Do you have any idea who she is?" Alexander, still shrouded by the gloom of the hall, watched the scene with a mixture of fascination and growing horror. He saw something that chilled his blood more than his fiancée's screeching. Lily, his daughter, did not run to Victoria, the woman who would soon become her stepmother and who supposedly adored her. No, Lily ran to Grace. The girl hid behind the housekeeper's legs, gripping the blue fabric of her skirt with white-knuckled force, burying her face in the apron. Grace, far from pushing her away in fear of reprimand, instinctively reached back with a gloved hand, covering the girl's back, creating a human shield between the little one and Victoria's fury. "I am so sorry, miss," Grace said, lowering her head, but not moving an inch from her protective stance. "Lily was sad, and the game is the only way she allows me to clean the room. We were being careful, I swear it. I am not interested in your low-class excuses." Victoria marched up to them, her face contorted in a grimace of disgust. "You are here to clean, not to play, mummy. Look at you. You are sweaty, filthy, and you have covered the child in germs. Get away from her this instant." Victoria reached out to grab Lily by the arm and yank her away from the housekeeper. The movement was abrupt, devoid of any tenderness. "Come here, my dear. That woman is dirty." But Lily did something unprecedented. She wrenched herself free from Victoria's grip and let out a high-pitched screech, clinging to Grace's leg again in desperation. "No!" the girl screamed. The word echoed through the room, bouncing off the high ceilings. Victoria froze, her hands suspended in the air. Grace closed her eyes, waiting for a blow or immediate dismissal, but she pressed the girl against herself more tightly. Alexander felt a deep nausea churning in his stomach. For months, Victoria had told him that Lily was difficult, that she needed discipline, that the girl's coldness was a symptom of her mental illness. But what he was seeing now was not illness. It was preference. It was a survival instinct. His daughter was terrified of his fiancée and adored the woman who mopped the floors. "Let her go, you idiot!" Victoria raised her voice again, losing her composure entirely. "You have brainwashed her. Alexander will hear about this. When he arrives tonight, you will be out on the street with your dirty laundry." "I am already here," Alexander said. His voice was low, calm, but charged with such heavy authority that the temperature of the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria spun on her heels, and her expression transformed in a split second. The mask of fury dissolved, replaced by a trembling smile and a look of rehearsed victimhood. "My love," she exclaimed, bringing her hands to her chest. "Thank God you have arrived. You have to see this. I arrived and found this woman endangering Lily's life. She was running, slipping. She almost threw her out the window. I had to intervene. I was terrified." Alexander moved slowly toward the center of the room. His footsteps echoed now with a domineering finality. He did not look at Victoria. His eyes were riveted on Grace, who was visibly trembling, and on Lily, who watched him with wide eyes, still clinging to the blue skirt. "Is that true, Grace?" Alexander asked, keeping his voice neutral. Grace swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears of helplessness. She knew her word was worthless against that of the future mistress of the house. "Sir, she babbled, unable to lie but afraid to tell the truth. "We were just playing. I take full responsibility. Please do not punish Lily, it was my idea." Alexander stopped 2 steps away from them. He saw the fear in Grace's eyes, not fear for herself, but fear for what would happen to the girl if she left. He watched as Grace's hand absently stroked Lily's hair to calm her, even as she faced her own dismissal. Then Alexander slowly turned his head towards Victoria. "You say she was putting her in danger?" he asked with an arched eyebrow. "Yes, my love, she is a savage," Victoria insisted, reaching out to hang onto his arm. "You need to fire her right now. It is not safe for our family." Alexander looked at Grace's yellow gloves. Then he looked at Victoria's perfectly manicured nails. He remembered the laugh. That laugh was worth more than his entire fortune. "It is funny," Alexander said, gently removing Victoria's grip from his arm, "because I have been watching from the door for 5 minutes, and it is the first time in 2 years that I have seen my daughter alive." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's smile faltered. "What? What do you mean?" she stammered. "But Alexander, darling, surely, it looked bad. It was hysteria, not laughter. The doctors said—" "I know what the doctors said," he cut her off dryly. "And I know what I saw. I saw an employee doing a mother's job, and I saw a mother come in screaming and destroying the happiest moment this house has seen in years." Victoria turned pale. Grace looked up, surprised, meeting the intense and grateful gaze of her employer. "Grace," Alexander said, softening his tone, "could you take Lily to the kitchen and give her some juice? I think the little horse needs a rest." "Yes, sir, immediately, sir," whispered Grace. She lifted Lily into her arms. The child offered no resistance and quickly left the room, casting a last furtive glance towards Alexander. When the kitchen door closed, Alexander turned to Victoria. The atmosphere shifted again. There was no warmth left. There was just a businessman analyzing a bad investment. "Never again," he said, pointing a finger at her. "Never raise your voice again to someone who is making my daughter happy. Understood?" Victoria clenched her jaw, her eyes flashing with a cold and calculating hatred that Alexander did not know how to interpret at that moment. She nodded meekly, but inside, the gears of her malice were already turning. She had underestimated the housekeeper. She thought she was just a cleaning girl, but now she saw she was a threat. And Victoria did not leave living threats on her territory. If Alexander wanted war, he would have it. But it would not be an open war. It would be a war of shadows, traps, and lies. And the poor maid wouldn't know what hit her until she was on the street or in jail. "I am sorry, my love," Victoria said in a sweet voice, lowering her head. "I was just worried. The stress of the wedding, you know. It won't happen again." But while she hugged Alexander, her eyes stared intently toward the kitchen door, promising a silent and brutal revenge. The air in the drawing room remained charged with static and dangerous electricity. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it for the first time in years, a gesture that betrayed his internal agitation. Victoria remained standing by the extinguished fireplace, arms crossed over her chest, pretending to admire an abstract painting. But Alexander could see the tension in her shoulders, stiff as steel. "I do not want this to happen again, Victoria," Alexander said, breaking the silence. His voice no longer held the fury of the previous moment, but retained an undeniable firmness. "That woman Grace has achieved in 3 weeks what you and I have not been able to do in 2 years. Victoria turned slowly. Her eyes were dry, calculating. She knew she had lost a battle, but not the war. "I'm just trying to protect her, Alexander," she replied with rehearsed softness. "Maybe I was exaggerating with the shouting. I admit the stress of the wedding preparations has me on edge. But you must see my point. A housekeeper does not have the education or the judgment to raise a girl of Lily's class. And if she had fallen? What if she had broken her neck slipping on that wet floor?" Alexander stared at her, searching for some trace of genuine concern on her face, but found only the usual coldness made up to look like responsibility. If she had fallen, Grace would have caught her. I saw it, Victoria. She wasn't cleaning. She was connecting. Lily was laughing. Alexander paused, savoring the memory. She was laughing out loud. When was the last time you made her laugh? The question hung in the air like a slap. Victoria pressed her lips together until they turned white. Before she could reply with some venomous excuse, the kitchen door opened timidly. Grace appeared, leading Lily by the hand, holding a tray with freshly brewed coffee. Her eyes were red, a sign she had cried silently, but her posture was dignified. "Excuse me, sir, madam," she said in a barely audible voice. "I thought you might need something warm." Alexander watched her as she poured the cups with trembling but precise hands. "Grace," he called her. She froze, waiting for the dismissal. "Tell me something. Explain to me. Why were you doing it? You know it is forbidden to run inside the house? You know it is grounds for immediate dismissal for putting furniture and safety at risk. Why risk your job?" Grace placed the coffee pot on the low table and looked up. For a second, the fear disappeared from her dark eyes, replaced by a brutal honesty that disarmed Alexander. "Because the silence of this house is too noisy for her, sir," Grace replied with an eloquence that did not match her uniform. "Lily is afraid of the silence. When everything is quiet, she remembers the absence of her mother. The noise of the Hoover terrifies her, but the silence depresses her. So I decided to turn cleaning into a game. If I make noise, if I scream and run, the world seems less serious, less dangerous for her. I didn't care about the floor, sir. I cared that she stopped staring at the wall." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. That humble woman had understood his daughter's psychology better than the 500-pound-an-hour doctors. "Thank you, Grace," Alexander murmured. "You may retire." Grace curtsied and headed for the hallway. Alexander took his cup of coffee and went to his study, passing Victoria without saying another word, leaving her alone with her anger. As soon as the door to Alexander's study closed with a click, Victoria's mask fell completely. She moved with the speed of a cobra, intercepting Grace in the dark corridor leading to the service quarters, away from Alexander's eyes and ears. Victoria grabbed Grace by the arm, digging her long, perfect nails into the tender flesh just above the elbow. Grace let out a gasp of pain, but Victoria covered her mouth with her other hand. "Listen to me well, you dead mosquito," Victoria whispered, her breath smelling of mint and poison. "Do not think you have won anything today. Alexander is a sentimental man, weak with the memory of his dead wife. You are just a cheap distraction." Grace tried to pull away, but Victoria squeezed harder, enjoying the fear in the maid's eyes. "Do you think you are going to stay here playing happy mummy?" Victoria let out a dry, cruel laugh. "I have plans for that spoiled little girl. As soon as I have the ring on my finger and Alexander signs the prenuptial papers, that brat is leaving." Victoria pulled a crumpled brochure she had been hiding in her pocket and rubbed it in Grace's face. It was a glossy pamphlet for a boarding school in Switzerland, Institut Les Roses, for children with behavioral difficulties. "Switzerland, darling, thousands of miles from here, where they teach real discipline, with cold showers and no stupid mop games." Victoria hissed, "So enjoy your time with her, because I am going to take care of getting you fired long before that day comes. And it won't be a pretty dismissal. I am going to make sure you never get a job again, not even cleaning latrines." Victoria pushed her against the wall and released her with contempt, smoothing her dress as if she had touched garbage. "Now get out and scrub something. That is all you are good for." Grace stood there, glued to the wall, her heart beating wildly. She didn't care about the threats regarding her job. She looked down the hallway where Victoria was walking away, her heels clicking victoriously. Her terror was not for herself, her terror was for Lily. That woman didn't want to be her mother. She wanted to get rid of her as if she were an old piece of furniture that clashed with the decor. Grace touched her arm where Victoria's fingernails had left red crescent-shaped marks that would soon turn purple, and she made a silent but unwavering decision. She wouldn't leave. They would have to drag her out of that house. 3 days passed. 3 days in which the atmosphere of the lakeside estate subtly changed. like the weather before a thunderstorm. Alexander had decided to extend his stay, working from home, canceling 2 important meetings in the city. He told his partners he needed to concentrate on the annual balance sheets, but the truth was happening through the ajar door of his study. Alexander had become a spy in his own house. From his desk, he had a strategic view of the conservatory and part of the main hall. He had moved his chair not for better light, but for a better angle. He couldn't help it. He needed to see if what he had witnessed on the first day was an isolated miracle, or if it was the new reality. What he saw shattered and rebuilt his heart simultaneously. It was mid-morning. Victoria had gone to the spa, claiming the tension of the house was ruining her complexion. The house was at peace. Alexander watched as Grace entered the conservatory with a basket of clean laundry. Lily was walking behind her, not with her head down as she usually did, but imitating Grace's steps, carrying her own small socks in her hands. "Very well, my star assistant," Grace said, her voice carrying clearly to Alexander's study. "Today, we are going to fold the clouds." "Clouds?" asked Lily. Her voice sounded hoarse but curious. "Yes, the white towels are clouds that we catch from the sky, and we have to fold them carefully so that it doesn't rain inside the house." Alexander stopped breathing. Clouds. What a poetic way to describe a boring household chore. Grace began to fold a towel, singing a soft melody made up on the fly. One fold here, one fold there. The cloud goes to sleep and to rest. Grace passed a small towel to Lily. The girl, concentrating with her tongue sticking out of the corner of her lips, tried to imitate her. Her clumsy little hands struggled with the terry cloth fabric. At another time, a nanny would have intervened, done it for her to save time. Not Grace. Grace waited, patient, eternal. "Not like that, Grace," Lily said in frustration. "Try again. The cloud is rebellious," Grace encouraged, smiling. Lily tried again, and when she managed to fold the towel more or less into a square, she looked up, beaming. And then it happened. Lily started singing, "Just a little fold, to rest." Alexander felt a warm tear rolling down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, feeling almost guilty for invading that sacred moment. His daughter was singing. She was living. He felt an irrepressible urge to go there and hug them, but he knew his presence would break the magic. Grace was the catalyst. He was still a stranger in his daughter's world. Suddenly, Grace reached up to place a stack of towels on a high shelf in the conservatory. As she raised her arm, the sleeve of her uniform slid down. Alexander sharpened his gaze. There, on the inner side of her pale arm, was an ugly mark, a dark bruise with yellowish edges, and above it, recent red marks like scratches or deep pinches. Alexander frowned. He recalled seeing her immaculate arms on the day of the interview. Had she hit herself working? It looked clumsy, but the shape of the mark looked like the imprint of fingers, a strong, violent grip. Before he could process it, Grace quickly lowered her arm and adjusted her sleeve, looking nervously towards the door as if afraid of being observed. Her expression of pain was fleeting but unmistakable. Alexander felt a twinge of suspicion. Something didn't fit. Grace radiated light, but she wore marks of darkness on her skin. At that moment, the sound of a powerful engine announced Victoria's arrival. Grace's body visibly tensed in the conservatory. The laughter stopped. Lily approached Grace and took her hand. The transformation was instantaneous, from joy to high alert. Alexander saw Victoria enter. She passed through the conservatory without even looking at the girl, but threw a withering glance at Grace. Alexander watched the exchange from the shadows of his study. He saw how Victoria moved her lips, whispering something as she passed, and how Grace lowered her head submissively. Victoria entered Alexander's study minutes later, bringing with her an air of expensive perfume and falsehood. "Darling," she exclaimed, kissing his cheek, "what an exhausting day. Dealing with incompetent people is so hard." Alexander looked at her, analyzing every gesture. "Everything fine at the spa?" "Oh yes, but—" Victoria made a dramatic pause, touching her earlobe. "Alexander, I am worried." "Why?" "I didn't want to tell you anything so as not to bother you with trifles, but—" Victoria lowered her voice, adopting a tone of confidence. "I have noticed that things are missing. Little things." Alexander tensed. "What things?" "Some notes from my wallet that I left on the hall table. A branded lipstick. And today, I can't find one of my diamond earrings. I am sure I left the small ones in the guest bathroom, the ones she cleaned this morning. Alexander felt his blood boil, but not for the reason Victoria expected. He looked his fiancée in the eyes. Are you suggesting that Grace is a thief? I'm not suggesting anything, my love. I'm just saying it is strange. They are humble people, Alexander. They have needs. Sometimes the temptation is too much. We should be careful. Maybe check her bag before she leaves today, just for safety. Alexander remembered the song of the clouds. He remembered Lily's laugh. And then he looked at Victoria's perfect manicure. Long, sharp nails the same size as the marks on Grace's arm. A terrible and dark doubt began to take root in the millionaire's mind. Victoria was planting seeds of distrust, watering them with poison. But Alexander was a shrewd businessman. He knew when someone was trying to sell him a lie. However, he needed proof. We are not going to search anyone without proof, Victoria, Alexander said coldly. We do not treat employees like criminals in this house because of a lost earring. Look for it properly. Victoria smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Whatever you say, darling, it will show up for sure. She turned to leave, and her face changed to a grimace of malevolent determination. It will appear wherever I want it to appear, she thought. Meanwhile, in the conservatory, Grace was hugging Lily, knowing that their time was running out. The war had begun, and the first attack was about to be launched. The business dinner at the lakeside estate had been millimetrically designed by Victoria to be the event of the year, but the atmosphere in the main dining room was as fragile as the crystal of the wine glasses the guests were holding. 12 people, including investment partners from Zurich and local bankers, were seated around the mahogany table under the dim light of a modern chandelier. Alexander, seated at the head, was trying to concentrate on the conversation about market mergers, but his mind was elsewhere. He was upstairs, where he knew Grace was putting Lily to bed. For the first time in months, he hadn't heard crying at bedtime, just a peaceful silence. Grace entered the dining room with her head down, carrying a silver tray with the coffee and dessert service. She wore the impeccable uniform, but her eyes avoided any contact, especially Victoria's, who presided at the other end of the table wearing a blood-red silk dress that looked like an open wound in the sobriety of the room. "Coffee, gentlemen," Grace whispered, serving with a precision that betrayed her years of experience. Alexander watched her out of the corner of his eye. He noticed how her left hand trembled slightly when serving Victoria. "Be careful, dear," Victoria said loudly, stopping the conversation at the table. "You almost stained my dress. It is a Chanel. I don't think your annual salary would cover the dry cleaning." An awkward silence fell on the table. The Swiss investors exchanged glances. Alexander clenched his jaw, feeling the shame of others. "Victoria, please," he warned in a gravelly voice. "I am just telling the truth, honey." "You have to be careful," she replied with a charming smile, turning to the guest on her right. "As I said, security is essential in these times. You never know who you are letting into your house." Grace finished serving and retreated toward the kitchen, her figure shrinking under the critical glances that Victoria had incited. That was when the trap sprang. 5 minutes later, while the guests were praising the dessert, Victoria let out a stifled scream and put her hand to her left wrist. The sound of her glass falling to the floor and breaking into 1,000 pieces made 2 bankers jump out of their chairs. "It cannot be," cried Victoria, springing to her feet with the pale face of an accomplished actress. "It is not there." Alexander got up immediately. "What is the matter? Have you cut yourself?" "My watch, the gold Rolex you gave me for our engagement." Victoria started shaking her hands, looking under the table, moving napkins with frantic gestures. "I had it on 20 minutes ago. I took it off for a second in the kitchen to wash my hands because I felt there was something sticky on it, and I left it on the counter." "Oh my God, Alexander, it is not here!" The tension in the room skyrocketed. Losing a $50,000 piece of jewelry in the middle of a dinner party wasn't just an accident, it was a scandal. "Calm down, Victoria, it must be in the kitchen," Alexander said, trying to keep his composure in front of his partners. "Let's go and get it." "No," she shouted, pointing towards the service door with a trembling finger. "I know where it is. I saw it, I left it by the sink, and that woman, she was there. She was hanging around my things all the time. I told you things were missing." Alexander, I warned you. Victoria, do not accuse without knowing, Alexander began, but she was already walking towards the kitchen with a determined step. The guests remained in a sepulchral silence. Alexander had no choice but to follow her, feeling a leaden weight in his stomach. When they entered the spacious and illuminated kitchen, they found Grace washing dishes at the sink, wearing yellow gloves, her back hunched. She turned around when she heard the door bang open, her eyes wide with fright. "Madam?" Grace asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Victoria swooped down on her like a hawk. "Where is it? Give it to me right now, and maybe I won't call the police." "What? What are you talking about?" Grace backed up until she collided with the fridge, panic starting to deform her face. "My watch!" "I know you took it," Victoria shouted. Then she turned to Alexander, who had just entered. "Check her things, Alexander. Check that disgusting cleaning bucket she carries everywhere." Grace shook her head frantically. "Sir, I swear on my life, I haven't taken anything. I have just been washing the dishes. Please believe me." Alexander looked at Grace. He wanted to believe her. He remembered Lily's laughter, the song of the clouds. But he also remembered Victoria's insidious words about the previous petty thefts. Doubt, that slow, slimy parasite, stirred in his brain. The pressure of having his partners waiting in the dining room, the scandal, Victoria's scream. He needed to solve this fast. "Grace," Alexander said, his voice sounding strange and far away to his own ears. "Empty the cleaning bucket." "No, now!" Grace looked at him with a disappointment that hurt Alexander more than a physical blow. "Sir, don't do this." "Do it," he commanded louder. With trembling hands, Grace picked up the blue plastic bucket she used to carry her cleaning products around the house. She tipped it over the center table in the kitchen. Wet rags fell out, a can of window cleaner, an old sponge, and then, with a metallic and shiny sound, the solid gold Rolex fell. The watch spun on the table and stopped right in front of Alexander. It glowed with a golden malice under the fluorescent lights of the kitchen. Grace's world collapsed in that second. She let out a choked groan, bringing her hands to her mouth. "Nine, I didn't put it there, sir. Someone put it there. I swear to you." Victoria let out a triumphant, cruel, sharp laugh. "You see," she hissed, looking at Alexander with venomous satisfaction. "Do you see it now? She is a thief. A common thief that you let into your daughter's life. Imagine what else she could have stolen from her. Her innocence? Her safety?" Alexander looked at the watch, then looked at Grace. The evidence was physical, irrefutable. It was there, but his instinct was screaming that something was wrong. Grace was crying not with the guilt of a caught thief, but with the anguish of an innocent condemned. However, the facts were the facts, and Alexander was a man of facts. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath of the detergent-laden, treacherous air. When he opened them, his gaze had hardened. He had to be the man of the house, the protector, the businessman. He could not afford to be sentimental about an employee who had stolen from under his own roof. "Pick up your things, Grace," Alexander said. His voice was flat, dead. "No, Alexander, we have to call the police." Victoria intervened, grabbing the watch and putting it on her wrist like a recovered trophy. "This woman needs to go to jail. It is a serious crime." "I said get your things," repeated Alexander, turning to Victoria with a look that made her shut up instantly. "There will be no police. I don't want patrols at my house with my partners having dinner in the living room. I don't want Lily to see the police taking anyone away. She leaves now." Grace was openly sobbing, shaking from head to toe. "Sir, for Lily, don't do this to me. She needs me. It wasn't me." "Stop it!" Alexander shouted, hitting the table with his fist. The sound made the crockery vibrate. "The evidence is there. Do not insult my intelligence. I gave you a chance. I let you get close to my daughter, and you repay me by stealing from my future wife." At that moment, a small noise at the kitchen service entrance made the three of them turn around. Lily was there. She was wearing her teddy bear pajamas and was barefoot. She had come down because of the noise of the screams. Her big blue eyes went from Alexander to Victoria and finally settled on Grace, who was a steer of misery against the counter. Lily saw the tears of her nanny, saw the aggressiveness in her father's posture, and then the girl who had spent 2 years in silence, the girl who barely whispered songs about clouds, ran. She did not run to her father for protection. She ran straight to Grace, hugged her legs with desperate strength, and shouted, "No!" Lily's scream was heartbreaking, guttural, filled with a rage and a pain that no 4-year-old should know. Not her! Not her! Alexander felt as if he had been shot in the chest. Seeing his daughter defend the alleged thief with such ferocity completely threw him off. Lily was punching the air with her little fists, looking at Victoria with pure hatred. Bad, Lily shouted, looking at Victoria. You mean? Victoria took a step back in surprise, but quickly regained her role. Oh, poor thing, she said in a fake voice. She is confused. That woman has manipulated her. Alexander, get her out of there. It is dangerous. Grace, despite her own misfortune, knelt on the kitchen floor and hugged Lily. Shh, my love. Shh, I am fine. Don't cry, princess. Don't cry. Your eyelashes will get wet. Don't go. I am yours, Lily cried, clinging to Grace's neck. Don't go, Mummy. The word hung in the air. Mummy? She had not said it to refer to her biological mother. She told that to Grace. Alexander felt the ground opening up under his feet. That one word should have been enough to stop him, to make him reconsider everything. But he looked at Victoria, looked at the recovered watch, thought about logic, about safety, about what he should do. The fear of making a mistake and leaving a criminal close to his daughter outweighed the emotion of the moment. He approached them and, with a softness that contrasted with the violence of the situation, separated Lily from Grace. The girl kicked and screamed, but Alexander picked her up in his arms. I am sorry, my dear. I am so sorry, he whispered in his daughter's ear as she cried inconsolably against his shoulder. You have to go, Grace. Leave before I change my mind and call the police. Alexander pulled out his wallet with one hand while holding Lily with the other. He pulled out a wad of notes, way more than he owed her for the 3 weeks, maybe 2,000 pounds in cash. Take this, he said, extending the money towards Grace, for the services rendered, and so that you won't have to steal at your next job. Go away. Grace slowly got to her feet, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She looked at the money Alexander was offering her. Then she looked him in the eye. At that moment, Grace ceased to be the frightened maid and became a woman with immense, almost regal dignity. I do not want your money, Mr. Sterling, she said in a firm, though broken voice. My job is not paid with dirty money, and my affection for Lily is priceless. Save it for yourself. It is going to take a lot to buy the silence of your conscience when you realize what you have done today. Grace did not look at Victoria. She did not give her the satisfaction. She turned, took her personal bag, leaving the cleaning bucket behind as a monument to injustice, and walked to the back door. Grace! Screamed Lily from her father's arms, stretching out her arms to her. Grace stopped on the threshold, her hand on the doorknob. She turned one last time, ignoring the adults and looking directly at the girl. Be brave, my little horse, she said with a sad smile. Remember the song, the clouds always pass, the sun always returns. And with that, she walked out into the cold, dark night, leaving behind the warm mansion, which without her suddenly felt like a tomb of ice. Alexander stood there with his daughter crying and trembling in his arms, the wad of rejected notes still in his hand, and a terrible, suffocating feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Victoria came over and put a hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing, my love, she said, patting Lily's back with feigned comfort. You will see that tomorrow everything will return to normal. But Alexander looked at the closed door where Grace had gone and knew that normalcy had died. Lily was still crying, but now it was a different cry. It was a cry of abandonment. And while cradling his daughter, Alexander noticed that Victoria was no longer looking at the girl. She was looking at her own reflection in the oven glass, admiring how the gold watch on her wrist shone. Doubt was no longer a parasite. It was now a monster, devouring Alexander from the inside. And if Grace was right, and if his conscience never fell silent again, the solid oak front door opened, letting in a gust of icy wind that swept the lobby, making the tears on Lily's cheeks tremble. The darkness of the night outside looked like a hungry beast waiting to devour the little light left in the girl's life. Grace adjusted her thin coat, a garment clearly not made for the bitter mountain cold, and tightened the strap of her cheap bag against her chest. She didn't look back at first. She took a step towards the threshold, her cloth slippers treading on the cold stone of the porch. Behind her, the scene was a tableau of emotional devastation. Alexander was holding Lily tightly, his knuckles white from the tension of preventing the girl from jumping out of his arms to run after the only mother she remembered. Lily's screams had turned into a hoarse, stifled cry, a sound of absolute defeat that pierced Alexander's conscience more deeply than any verbal accusation. "Grace?" moaned the girl, extending a trembling hand towards the retreating figure. "Don't go. I'm scared." Grace stopped in her tracks. Her back went rigid. The sound of that childish voice, full of genuine terror, was louder than her wounded pride. She turned slowly, ignoring the fine rain that was starting to fall and wet her hair. Her eyes, dark and deep, sought Alexander's. There was no hatred in them, just an infinite sadness and an urgency that he failed to understand instantly. Victoria, standing a few steps behind Alexander with her arms crossed and a barely disguised smile of satisfaction at the corner of her lips, took a step forward. "Get out of here already," Victoria snapped. "Stop making this show more difficult for the girl. If you really loved her, you would leave without making a fuss." Grace ignored Victoria as if she were invisible. She walked back towards Alexander, invading his personal space with a determination that made him instinctively take a step back. But Grace wasn't going to attack him. She stopped a few centimeters from him, so close that Alexander could smell the scent of lavender and cheap soap that she gave off, and a smell of cleanliness and home that contrasted with Victoria's aggressive and expensive perfume. "Mr. Sterling," Grace said in a very low voice, almost a whisper that only he could hear. The rain pattered against the ground, creating a curtain of privacy. "You are a good man. I can see it in the way you look at your daughter. But you are a blind man." Alexander frowned, about to reply, to tell her to move away, but the intensity in Grace's gaze paralyzed him. She raised a hand, not to touch him, but to point vaguely towards the upper floor, towards Lily's room. "Don't believe me. Don't believe my words or my tears," Grace continued, accelerating the pace of her words as if she knew she had seconds before Victoria intervened. "But for the love of God, for the memory of your deceased wife, check Barnaby the bear." Alexander blinked in confusion. "What?" "The old teddy bear, the one on the high shelf, the one Lily never touches," Grace whispered urgently, her eyes riveted on his. "He has a loose glass eye. A week ago, cleaning it, I noticed a red light inside. It is a camera, sir, an old security camera that maybe you forgot. Check today's recording. Check the last hour." "Get away from him," Victoria shouted, pushing Grace sharply by the shoulder, breaking the intimacy of the moment. "What are you telling him? Are you asking him for more money? Get out of here or I will call urban security and get you dragged out." Grace stumbled from the push but regained her balance. She looked at Alexander one last time. The message had been delivered. It was up to him now. "Take care of her, sir. Take care of her because she is in a cage with a wolf," Grace said loudly this time. Then she looked at Lily, who had stopped crying to listen, attentive to her heroine's every move. Grace put her hand to her heart and then threw a kiss in the air. "I love you, my brave girl. Remember the game." Without waiting for an answer, Grace turned around and ran into the rain, disappearing into the darkness of the driveway, swallowed up by night and injustice. Alexander stood on the threshold, his heart hammering against his ribs. The rain was wetting the floor of the hall, but he did not move. Grace's words echoed in his head like a deafening bell. "Check Barnaby the bear. A camera." "Finally," sighed Victoria, closing the door with a thud, leaving the noise of the rain outside. "My God, what a dramatic woman." "You should have reported her, Alexander. Those kind of people only understand a heavy hand." Alexander looked at Victoria. He saw her smoothing her dress, saw how she stroked the gold watch on her wrist with a sickly possessiveness. For the first time in months, he noticed something in his fiancée's expression that he didn't like. A hardness in her eyes, a cruel triumph glow that didn't fit the image of the sweet woman he planned to marry. "I'm going to take Lily to bed," Alexander said dryly. "Do you want me to help you, honey?" offered Victoria, reaching over to touch the girl's head. Lily turned away abruptly, as if Victoria's hand were on fire, and hidden her face in her father's neck. "No," cried the girl, her voice choked. "Not you." Victoria withdrew her offended hand. "Well, as you like. She is upset. She will get over it tomorrow. I am going to pour myself a glass of wine. It has been an exhausting night." Alexander went up the stairs with heavy steps, feeling that each step took him further away from certainty and plunged him deeper into a swamp of doubts. The house, which hours before had resounded with laughter and songs about clouds, was now plunged into a sepulchral silence, a silence that weighed tons. The next morning dawned gray, as if the weather had decided to accompany the morning of the mansion. The light coming through the windows was not golden or warm. It was a white, cold, clinical light that revealed the dust floating in the stagnant air. The lakeside estate had returned to darkness. Alexander came down to breakfast with deep, dark circles marking his face. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night tossing and turning in bed, with Grace's words drilling into his brain. Check Barnaby the bear. He hadn't done it yet. A part of him, a cowardly part, was afraid of what he might find. Afraid to find out that the woman he was sharing his life with was a monster. Afraid to admit that he had made an irreparable mistake by throwing out the only person who had saved his daughter. As he entered the kitchen, the scene he found turned his stomach. Lily was seated in her high chair, motionless. She looked like a wax statue. Her blue eyes were staring at a fixed point on the wall, empty, lifeless. In front of her was a plate of cold porridge and a glass of untouched orange juice. Victoria was standing next to her, a cup of coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, typing furiously. When she saw Alexander enter, she quickly blocked the mobile screen and forced a smile. "Good morning, my love. Did you sleep well?" Victoria asked, her light and carefree tone clashing violently with the funereal atmosphere of the kitchen. "Not much," Alexander murmured, sitting down at the head of the table. He looked at his daughter. "My dear, aren't you going to eat?" Lily didn't respond. She didn't even blink. Selective mutism had returned with a brutal vengeance. The girl who sang yesterday didn't exist today. "She has been like this for half an hour," Victoria said with an impatient sigh, putting her cup down on the table with a bang a little harder than necessary. "She is a brat, Alexander. She is throwing a tantrum to punish us for yesterday. We shouldn't give in. If she is hungry, she will eat." Alexander felt a twinge of irritation. "She is a 4-year-old girl, Victoria. It is not a tantrum. She is It is manipulation," Victoria insisted, her voice hardening. "That maid taught her tricks. Look at this." Victoria took the spoon with cold porridge and put it to Lily's mouth. "Open your mouth, my dear. Come on, we don't have all day." Lily closed her lips tightly, clenching her jaw. "I said open your mouth," Victoria suddenly shouted, losing her patience. With her free hand, she grabbed Lily's cheeks and squeezed hard to force her to open her mouth. Her long nails dug into the girl's soft skin. Lily let out a groan of pain, her eyes filling with tears, but she didn't fight back. She only allowed it to happen with a resignation that broke Alexander's heart into 1,000 pieces. "Let her go!" Alexander bellowed, jumping to his feet and knocking over his chair. Victoria let go of the girl as if she had burned her, turning to Alexander with wild eyes. "I am just trying to get her to eat," she defended in a high-pitched voice. "She is going to get sick if she doesn't eat. I am doing it for her own good." Alexander walked around the table in 2 strides and pushed Victoria away from the high chair. He crouched down in front of Lily and saw the faint but visible red marks that Victoria's fingers had left on his daughter's cheeks. They were the same marks, the same pattern he had seen on Grace's arm. Alexander's world stopped. The doubt evaporated, replaced by a cold and terrible certainty. Grace hadn't hit herself cleaning. Grace had been pinched. Grace had been attacked, and now his daughter was suffering the same. "Go to the drawing room," Alexander said without looking at Victoria. His voice was so low it seemed to come from beyond the grave. "Alexander, please, you are exaggerating." "Go to the drawing room!" Alexander's scream was so powerful that the crystal glasses in the cabinet vibrated. Victoria, really scared for the first time, backed away and left the kitchen hurriedly. Muttering about ingratitude and nerves, Alexander was left alone with his daughter. He wiped her tears with his thumbs, trembling with contained rage. "I am sorry, Princess. Daddy is a fool. Daddy is going to fix it." Lily looked at him, and for a second Alexander saw a plea in her eyes. Bring her back. Alexander kissed his daughter's forehead and left the kitchen, but he did not go to the drawing room to talk to Victoria. He ran up the stairs, taking the steps two by two. His destination was Lily's room. He entered the playroom, which now looked like a mausoleum of abandoned toys. His eyes scanned the room frantically, the dollhouse, the wooden train, the stories. And there, on top of the bookshelf, covered by a thin layer of dust, was the bear. Barnaby the bear. It was a brown teddy bear, old and worn, that had belonged to his wife. Alexander felt a chill when he remembered it. 3 years ago, when Lily was born, his wife had insisted on installing a Nanny Cam hidden in the bear, paranoid about the baby's safety. Alexander had completely forgotten its existence after the death of his wife. The system recorded in a loop on an internal memory card and was activated by movement. Alexander took the bear down with trembling hands. The teddy was looking at him with his button eyes. Alexander examined the right eye. Sure enough, if he looked closely, he could see the tiny dark lens hidden in the plastic pupil. He turned the bear around and felt for the back seam hidden under the Velcro of the doll's waistcoat. There it was, the SD card slot and a small USB port. Alexander felt his heart leap out of his chest. If Grace was right, the truth of what had happened yesterday was locked up in that little plastic chip. And if she was right, God forgive him what he was going to do to Victoria. He ran to his study, locked the door, and sat down in front of his laptop. He connected the USB cable to the bear and the computer port. The screen flickered. A folder opened automatically. Security recordings. Alexander clicked on the folder with yesterday's date. There were several files. His finger hovered over the touchpad, hesitating for the last second. He was about to see something that would change his life forever. He was about to see the true face of the woman he was going to marry. He took a deep breath in air that tasted like ash and hit play. The video opened. The image was sharp, high definition, with a perfect angle covering the entire living room and part of the entrance to the kitchen. Alexander leaned toward the screen, and what he saw in the first few seconds made the blood freeze in his veins and his fists clench until the knuckles cracked. "My God," Alexander whispered in horror. "What have I done?" The laptop screen flickered once before stabilizing, illuminating Alexander's face with a bluish, spectral glow. His fingers, still trembling, clung to the edge of the mahogany desk as if it were the only lifeline in a shipwreck. The video file started playing. The date and time in the upper right corner marked yesterday, 19:45 p.m., 15 minutes before all hell broke loose at dinner. The image, captured from the height of the shelf where the teddy bear was resting, showed a perfect panoramic view of the hallway connecting the drawing room with the kitchen, a blind spot that the main security cameras of the house did not cover. At first, the video showed the silence of the house. Then Grace entered the frame. She was carrying her blue cleaning bucket, the same one that hours later would be the proof of her crime. Alexander felt a sharp pain in his chest when he saw her. Grace was not reluctantly cleaning. She was gently dancing while she ran the rag over the skirting boards, humming something that the bear's microphone barely picked up, but that Alexander knew was a song for Lily. Suddenly, the figure of Victoria appeared on the screen. Alexander held his breath. In the video, Victoria did not walk with the rehearsed elegance she showed in public. She walked with quick, furtive steps, looking over her shoulder, making sure that Alexander and the guests were busy in the main dining room. The Victoria in the video intercepted Grace right under the camera. The audio, though, with a slight hiss of static, was painfully clear. "You," Victoria hissed in the recording. Her face was contorted into a sneer that Alexander had never seen directed at him. "What do you think you are doing, walking around here like you own the place?" On the screen, Grace submissively lowered her head. "I am just going to wash the dishes at the entrance, madam." "Don't answer me!" Victoria raised her hand and, with a quick and cruel movement, pushed Grace against the wall. The thud echoed off the laptop speakers. Alexander let out a gasp, putting a hand to his mouth. Seeing the physical violence exerted by his fiancée on a defenseless woman was a shock. But what followed was a nightmare. Lilith appeared on the scene. The girl, small and vulnerable in her pajamas, came out from behind a column, having witnessed the push. "Stop, Grace," his little girl screamed in the video, Victoria turned to the girl, and then the unforgivable happened. The woman that Alexander planned to become the mother of his daughter bent down, grabbed Lily by the arm with vicious force, and shook her. "Listen to me well, you stupid brat," Victoria growled, bringing her face closer to the girl's. "I am sick of you and your little mute games. As soon as I marry your father, you will be gone, so far away that you won't even remember his name. You are going to learn to respect me, even if I have to teach you with beatings." In the video, Grace reacted like a lioness. She dropped the cleaning bucket and threw herself on Victoria, tearing the woman's hands from the girl's arm. "Don't touch her," Grace shouted, putting her body between the aggressor and the girl. "If you lay a hand on her again, I swear I won't mind losing my job." Spahram. "Ah, I'll gouge out your eyes." Victoria recoiled in surprise at the employee's ferocity, but then she smiled, a malevolent, cold, calculating smile. "Ah, yes," said Victoria, smoothing her dress. "Do you think you can threaten me in my own house? Let's see who believes who. You are the maid. I am the future Mrs. Sterling. Today is your last night here." Victoria looked around quickly. Her eyes fell on Grace's cleaning bucket, which had been left open on the floor. With a psychopathic calm, Victoria unclasped the gold Rolex from her wrist. She looked Grace in the eyes, holding the watch in the air like a hypnotic pendulum. "Say goodbye to me, Mummy," Victoria said mockingly, and dropped the watch into the bucket among the dirty rags. "No," Grace screamed in the video, trying to reach the bucket, but Victoria kicked the container away. "Now I am going to enter the dining room and I am going to scream that you have robbed me," whispered Victoria, getting closer to Grace's face. "And when Alexander comes, he is going to find you with the evidence, and you won't say anything about how I treated the girl. Because if you open your mouth, I'll tell the police that you hit Lily too. Who do you think they will believe? The millionaire fiancé or the starving maid?" Victoria turned around, purposely tousled her hair to look distressed, and ran towards the dining room, shouting, "My watch! My watch!" Alexander hit the spacebar to pause the video. The image froze on Victoria's triumphant face just before she left the scene. A roar of pure, primitive, volcanic fury was born in Alexander's throat. He grabbed a massive glass paperweight from his desk and threw it with full force against the opposite wall. The glass exploded into 1,000 pieces, but the noise was not enough to silence the din of his own guilt. He covered his face with his hands, feeling the tears of rage and helplessness burn his skin. "I am an idiot," Alexander said, pounding the table with his fist until he felt pain. "I am a bloody blind fool." Grace was right. Victoria's every word in the video was a stab. "You will go so far away that you won't even remember his name. Stupid brat." Alexander remembered how he had defended Victoria, how he had thrown Grace out into the street in the rain, how he had allowed the monster to sleep under his roof and threaten his daughter. The image of Grace defending Lily kept repeating in his mind. A woman who had nothing had risked everything to protect a girl who was not hers, while he, the powerful father, had failed miserably. Alexander got up from the chair. His sadness had evaporated, replaced by a cold, lethal determination. He wiped his tears away. There was no room for pain anymore, only for justice. He disconnected the laptop with a sharp jerk, closed it, and took it under his arm as if it were a loaded gun. He left the study. His footsteps echoed in the hallway with a different weight than yesterday. Yesterday they were steps of doubt. Today they were steps of execution. Alexander descended the great spiral staircase of the mansion. From the landing, he could see the main drawing room. Victoria was there, sitting comfortably on the white leather sofa, surrounded by bridal magazines. She had the phone glued to her ear and a glass of mimosa in her hand. "No, listen to me well," Victoria was saying on the phone, her voice full of arrogance. "I want the flowers to be imported orchids, not those cheap local roses. The budget is not a problem. Alexander will pay anything to make me happy. Yes, and make sure that the children's menu is minimal. I want it to be an elegant wedding, not a nursery." Alexander reached the last step. He didn't say anything. He walked straight to the huge 85-inch flat-screen TV that dominated the stone wall in front of the sofa. Victoria saw him coming in and covered the phone's microphone, smiling at him. "Honey, I am talking to the organizer. They have some divine ideas for the reception. Do you mind if we book the symphony orchestra? Alexander did not answer. With mechanical and precise movements, he connected the HDMI cable of his laptop to the side port of the TV. Alexander? Victoria frowned, noticing for the first time the tension in his jaw and the darkness in his eyes. What are you doing? Are you going to work now? I am trying to plan our future. Hang up the phone, Alexander said. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, vibrating military order. But, hang up the damn phone! Alexander's scream made Victoria drop the glass, spilling the orange liquid onto the Persian rug. Victoria immediately cut the call, looking at him with genuine fear. Alexander, you are scaring me. What is the matter with you? Is it about the girl again? Alexander turned to her. He had the remote control in his hand. No, Victoria, it is not about the girl. It is about you. It is for the future Mrs. Sterling. He pressed the play button. The giant screen came to life. The high-definition image of the spy bear filled the room. The sound, amplified by the home theater system, was thunderous. Victoria's face paled instantly, turning the color of ash. Her eyes widened inordinately as she saw herself on the giant screen, pushing Grace, shaking Lily, confessing her plan, planting the watch. Say goodbye to me, Mummy. Her own voice echoed in the room, distorted and monstrous. Victoria put her hands to her mouth. She couldn't breathe. The evidence was overwhelming, grotesque, undeniable. She saw Alexander's expression as he looked at the screen. It was a look of absolute disgust, as if he were looking at a cockroach. The video ended with the frozen image of Victoria running into the dining room to fake the robbery. Alexander turned off the television, plunging the room into a deadly silence. Alexander? Victoria began, her voice trembling, desperately trying to find a way out. That is not what it looks like. It is a setup. Nowadays, with artificial intelligence, they can do anything. That maid must have hired someone to do that. It is fake. Alexander looked at her with cold disbelief. Artificial intelligence? He asked, walking slowly towards her. Did artificial intelligence also make you pinch my daughter until you left marks on her? Did artificial intelligence make you call her a nuisance? Victoria got up from the sofa, trying to get closer to him, putting her hands on his chest to use her charms one last time. My love, I was stressed. You don't understand how difficult it is for me. That girl hates me. She provokes me. Alexander pushed her hands away with a sharp slap, as if she were contagious. Don't you dare touch me. You disgust me. I did it for us, cried Victoria, abandoning the victim mask and showing her true face of despair. That girl is an anchor. Alexander, she has you tied to the past. We will never be happy with her in the middle. I wanted to send her away so that we could start from scratch. Have our own children. Normal children. The words hung in the air. Victoria realized too late that she had just confessed everything. Alexander approached her, invading her space until Victoria had to back up and fall back onto the sofa. You have 10 minutes, Alexander said. What? You have 10 minutes to get upstairs, pack your bags, and get the hell out of my house. If you are still here in 10 minutes, I will call the police and give them the video. I will accuse you of child abuse, false reporting, theft, and defamation. I assure you that with my lawyers, you will rot in prison for the rest of your youth. You can't do this to me. The wedding, the invitations. What will people say? I am a Sterling, Victoria, Alexander said, his voice dripping with ice. I don't give a damn what people say. I care about my daughter. Get out. Alexander's shout was definitive. Victoria got up, trembling with rage and humiliation. Seeing that there was no negotiation possible, her face transformed into a mask of pure hatred. Fine, she spat, regaining her venomous haughtiness. I am leaving. Stay with your retarded brat and your boring house. I never loved you anyway. I just loved your bank account. You were a trampoline, Alexander, and in bed you are pathetic. Alexander did not even flinch at the insults. They hurt less than the air. 9 minutes, he said, looking at his watch. Victoria let out a cry of frustration and ran upstairs. Banging was heard, drawers opening and closing violently. Alexander stayed in the drawing room, motionless as a statue, listening as the cancer of his life was removed. 8 minutes later, Victoria came downstairs dragging 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases, scratching the wooden floor in her haste. She passed by Alexander without looking at him, with her head high but with trembling hands. She opened the front door and went out. Alexander walked to the door and saw her get into her sports car. When the engine roared and the car drove away, kicking up gravel, Alexander closed the door, slid the bolt, and then leaned his forehead against the cold wood and exhaled a sigh that had been contained for 2 years. The house was silent again, but this time it wasn't an oppressive silence. It was the silence of cleanliness. The air seemed lighter. "Daddy?" The little voice came from the top of the stairs. Alexander turned around. Lily was there, clinging to the banister, looking with frightened eyes. She had heard the screams. Alexander ran up the stairs and knelt down in front of her, hugging her with desperate strength. "She is gone, my love. The witch is gone. She will never come back again. She'll never hurt you again." Lily allowed herself to be hugged, sinking her little face into her father's shoulder. But Alexander felt that his daughter's little body was still tense. Something was missing. The key piece was missing to make Lily's heart really beat again. "Grace, whispered Lily. The question pierced Alexander. He gently separated from his daughter and looked into her eyes, holding her hands. "Lily, listen to me well. Daddy made a very big mistake. But I promise you, I swear on my life that I am going to bring her back. I'm not going to stop until I find her. Let's go get her right now." Alexander got up, carried Lily in his arms, and went downstairs with a renewed purpose. He didn't know where Grace lived. He did not have her exact address, just a personnel file with basic data in the city office. But he was Alexander Sterling. He had resources, he had money, and for the first time in a long time, he had a mission worth fighting for. He would move heaven and earth, he would search under the stones, but Grace would come home. The digital thermometer emitted a high-pitched beep that sounded like a fire alarm in the sepulchral silence of the nursery. Alexander looked at the screen and felt the world crashing down on him. 39.5 degrees. Lily was on fire. His little daughter was lying on the bed in a cold sweat, her skin pale and translucent, and her glassy eyes were glued to the door, waiting for someone who did not arrive. It wasn't a flu. It wasn't a virus. The family doctor, who had just left 10 minutes ago, had put away his stethoscope with a grave expression and had been brutally honest. "There is no physical infection. Mr. Sterling, this is somatization. Your daughter is suffering from severe acute depression. Her body is shutting down because her spirit has given up. If you don't give back what she lost, no antibiotic is going to lower that fever." Alexander stroked Lily's damp hair. "Hold on, my love. Hold on a little longer," he whispered to her, kissing her boiling forehead. Lily moved her parched lips. "Clouds," she whispered deliriously. "I want the clouds." Alexander stood up suddenly. He couldn't wait any longer. He called Mrs. Higgins, the longtime cook who lived on the property and who was the only person he trusted. "Now that Victoria's gone, stay with her. Don't move from her side. If the fever rises by 1/10 more, call the ambulance. I am going to bring the cure." Alexander left the mansion like a whirlwind. Outside, the sky had broken. A thunderstorm was battering the Lake District, turning roads into rivers of mud and danger. But Alexander didn't care. He jumped into his armored Range Rover, started the engine with a roar, and shot out into the city, ignoring the rain that was hitting the windshield violently. He had an address. He had had to call his head of human resources at 10 p.m., waking him up to demand Grace's complete file. San Miguel District, Alley of the Forgotten, number 4. The name of the street seemed like a cruel joke of fate. He drove for 40 minutes, going from the paved and perfect roads of his residential area to the potholed and garbage-strewn roads of the periphery. The city was changing its skin. The neon lights of the shopping malls gave way to broken street lamps and stray dogs seeking shelter under the awnings. He arrived at the address. It wasn't a house. It was a ramshackle boarding house with chipped walls. Alexander knocked on the door in despair. A woman opened it, looking at him suspiciously. "I am looking for Grace. Grace Ramirez." "She went to work," the woman said dryly, looking at Alexander's expensive watch. "Night shift at the Black Cat Cafe, near the bus station. You have to pay the rent, don't you?" Since she was kicked out of her rich job without warning. The accusation hit Alexander, but he didn't have time for explanations. He got back in the car and sped towards the station. The Black Cat was a dreary place, smelling of stale grease and burnt coffee, full of tired lorry drivers and people who had nowhere to go. Alexander walked in, his 3,000-pound Italian suit and soggy leather shoes clashing violently with the sticky linoleum floor. His eyes scanned the place, and then he saw her. Grace was behind the bar in a worn gray uniform that was too big for her. She looked exhausted. She had deep circles under her eyes, and her movements, once full of grace and energy, were slow and heavy. She was serving coffee to a burly man who was yelling something at her about cold food. "Move, you useless thing!" shouted the owner, a balding, sweaty man banging on the bar. "Clear table 4. A soda has been dropped." Alexander felt a hot anger, but he swallowed it. He walked towards the bar. The sound of his firm footsteps made some customers turn around. Grace was bent over, wiping the floor with a dirty rag. When she saw some fancy shoes standing in front of her, she froze. She looked up slowly, running up the legs of the trousers until she reached Alexander's face. Her eyes widened in surprise, followed immediately by a wall of defensive coldness. She stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "If you came to ask me for the change of the taxi money you gave me to leave, I don't have it," Grace said in a harsh voice. "I used it for lunch." "Grace," Alexander's voice broke. It wasn't the voice of the arrogant millionaire. It was the voice of a desperate father. "Go away, Mr. Sterling. We don't pour champagne here, and I don't want any problems with my boss. Lily is dying." The sentence fell between them like an atomic bomb. Grace's coldness disintegrated in a millisecond. She let go of the rag, which fell to the floor with a sad splash. "What?" Her voice was a horrified whisper. "She has a fever of almost 40. She doesn't eat. She doesn't talk. She is delirious, calling for you. The doctor says it is sadness. She is letting go." Alexander took a step forward, ignoring the customers who were watching the scene as if it were a soap opera. "Grace, I need you." "Listen to me," the manager shouted, coming out of the kitchen. "Are you going to order something, or are you going to annoy my employee? Ramirez, go back to work, or I'll dock your pay." Alexander didn't even look at the manager. He kept his eyes fixed on Grace's. And then Alexander Sterling, the man who closed million-pound deals without blinking, the man who never asked for forgiveness, did the unthinkable. In front of the lorry drivers, in front of the manager, on the dirty and greasy floor of a seedy cafe, Alexander got down on his knees. An absolute silence took over the place. "I ask for your forgiveness," Alexander said in a hoarse voice, not caring that his trousers got stained. "I was blind. I was stupid. I saw the video. I saw what she did. I saw what you did for my daughter. I was wrong about everything. I offered you money to leave. Now I offer you my life to come back. Not for me. For her. Save her, please." Grace put her hands to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Seeing that proud man on his knees, destroyed by guilt and love for his daughter, collapsed her last defenses. The manager let out a nervous laugh. "But well, what is this? Get up, man. Ramirez, tell him to get out." Grace looked at her boss, then looked at Alexander. She took off her gray apron and threw it on the bar with a liberating force. "I quit," Grace said in a firm voice. Then she bent down and took Alexander's hands, forcing him to get up. "Don't kneel, sir. A father who loves his daughter should never kneel. He should only run to her. Take me home." Alexander got up, feeling such a great relief that he almost got dizzy. Without saying another word, he took her by the hand and they ran out into the rain, leaving the cafeteria, the misery, and the past behind, running to the car as if death were on their heels because death was hovering around Lily's bed, and only they could stop it. The return trip was a race against death and against the storm. Alexander was driving with his knuckles white on the steering wheel, defying the speed limits, while the windshield wipers struggled uselessly against the deluge. The silence inside the car was dense, but it was no longer hostile. It was a shared silence of anguish and hope. Grace was in the passenger seat, her hands clasped in the shape of a prayer, biting her lower lip. Every minute seemed like an hour. "Is she still not eating?" Grace asked, breaking the silence, looking at the dark road. "She hasn't had a bite since you left." She just cries until she falls asleep from exhaustion. And when she wakes up, it's like she's not there. Grace closed her eyes, feeling a physical pain in her chest. I promised her that the clouds would pass. I lied to her. I was her cloud, and I left. No, Alexander took one hand off the steering wheel for a second, and in an instinctive gesture, briefly squeezed Grace's shoulder. You were the sun. I was the storm that covered it up. But that is over. Victoria is no longer here. No one will hurt you in that house again. I give you my word of honor. When they arrived at the lakeside estate, the lights were on, shining like a lighthouse in the middle of the tempest. Alexander braked the car sharply in front of the entrance, skidding on the wet gravel. He didn't even bother to turn off the engine. They both ran up the steps. Alexander opened the front door and Grace entered first without waiting for permission, guided by the maternal instinct that screamed at her where the girl was. She went up the stairs 2 at a time, her heart pounding in her throat. When she reached the upstairs hallway, she found Mrs. Higgins coming out of Lily's room with a damp cloth and a face of deep concern. Grace, the cook exclaimed when she saw her, crossing herself. Thank God, she is on fire. She won't stop shaking. Grace did not stop. She entered the room. The light of the bedside lamp dimly illuminated the small figure under the giant duvet. Lily seemed tiny, fragile, lost between the silk sheets. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, a sibilant sound that filled Grace with terror. She approached the bed slowly, afraid of scaring her, or worse, that it would be too late. My little horse, Grace whispered, her voice broken by emotion. I am back. Lily didn't move at first. She seemed to be very far away, in that dark place where children hide when the pain is too great. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, her hands cold from the rain, gently touched the burning cheek of the girl. Lily, it's me. I am Grace. We have come to play with the clouds. Lily's eyelids trembled. Slowly, heavily they opened. Her blue eyes, veiled by fever, took a few seconds to focus. When Grace's image became sharp, something changed in the room. It was as if an electric current had reactivated a stopped heart. Mummy? Lily's whisper was just a thread of voice. Grace smiled through tears, stroking her hair. Here I am, my love. Here I am. Lily pulled a hand out from under the covers, a weak little hand that sought Grace's face, touching her skin to make sure it was real and not a fever dream. As she felt the dampness of the rain on Grace's cheek, reality hit her. Suddenly, Lily let out a sigh, but not of sadness, of pure relief. With a strength that seemed impossible for her condition, she sat up and threw herself into Grace's arm, burying her face in her neck, clinging to her like a castaway to a board in the middle of the ocean. You're back, you're back. The little girl was crying, repeating the words over and over again. Grace wrapped her in her arms, rocking her, kissing her head, her shoulders, her little hands. Never again, my life. I am never going to leave. Forgive me. I swear I will never leave you alone again. Alexander was watching from the threshold of the door. He was soaked, with a ruined suit and his hair plastered to his forehead, but he had never felt richer in his life. Watching that scene caused a lump in his throat that prevented him from swallowing. He watched as his daughter's tense body gradually relaxed in Grace's arms. He watched as the girl's agitated breathing began to synchronize with that of the woman holding her. He witnessed an inexplicable medical miracle. The fever of the soul was beginning to subside before his eyes. The color was slowly returning to Lily's cheeks, not the red of illness, but the pink of life. Grace looked up and met Alexander's eyes at the door. There were no words. There was no need. In that shared look, over the head of the girl they both loved, a pact stronger than any labor or marriage contract was signed. Alexander understood in that instant that his money, his companies, and his status were worth nothing compared to the loyalty and pure love that this humble woman had just brought back to his home. Sir, Grace said softly without letting go of Lily, I think Lily is hungry. I could ask Mrs. Higgins to bring some soup, but let it be cloud soup. Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, erasing years of bitterness. Cloud soup, coming right up, madam, he replied. And as he was walking down the stairs to the kitchen, Alexander realized that he had just called Grace Madam without thinking about it. And for the first time, the title sounded right in that house. The real mistress of the home was not the one with the surname or the diamond ring, but the one with his daughter's heart. The millionaire had learned the most expensive lesson of his life, and fortunately, it had not been too late. A month later, the lakeside estate seemed to have been demolished and rebuilt from the ground up, although not a single brick had been moved. The change was not in the architecture, but in the soul of the house. The heavy dark velvet curtains that always kept the rooms in an elegant and depressing gloom had disappeared, replaced by light white linen fabrics that danced with the morning breeze, letting the sunlight flood every corner, revealing dust particles that no longer bothered anyone. It was Saturday morning in the kitchen, where weeks ago the drama of a stolen watch and an unfair dismissal had been lived. Now a glorious chaos reigned, scented with vanilla and hot butter. Alexander Sterling, the man who used to check the Tokyo stock market indices while drinking a black coffee in sepulchral silence, was standing by the counter. But he wasn't wearing his three-piece suit. He was wearing gray tracksuit bottoms and a white t-shirt stained with flour. He had a spatula in his hand and an expression of absolute concentration, more intense than the one he wore at his board meetings. "Watch out, Daddy! The cloud is going to burn!" Lily shouted from her high chair, clapping her palms enthusiastically. Lily had regained the weight she lost during her illness, and her cheeks had a healthy pink color that shone under her blonde curls. There was no longer any trace of the traumatic silence. Now Lily was talking 19 to the dozen, singing, laughing, and giving orders in the kitchen like a little general. "Don't worry, Captain. I have the situation under control," Alexander replied, trying to flip a supposedly bear-shaped pancake, which ended up landing half-folded on the plate. A soft musical laugh echoed behind him. Grace was leaning on the doorframe, watching the scene with her arms crossed and a smile that lit up her whole face. She no longer wore the blue uniform with the white apron. That uniform had been ceremonially burned in the fireplace 2 weeks ago at Alexander's insistence. Now Grace was wearing simple jeans and a lavender silk blouse, which highlighted her figure and her natural elegance. She didn't look like an employee. She looked like what she really was, the central pillar of that family. "I think Barnaby the bear has suffered an accident in the frying pan, Mr. Chef," Grace joked, approaching to inspect Alexander's culinary disaster. Alexander turned around, and when he saw her, his expression softened in a way that would have terrified his former business partners with its vulnerability. "I give up. I'm good at buying companies, but I am a mess making flour bears." "It is your turn to save breakfast, Grace." Grace took the spatula from his hand, and their fingers brushed against each other. The static electricity of the moment was palpable. It wasn't the tension of fear or hierarchy. It was the tension of something new, something that had been quietly growing between them during the last 4 weeks of living together, of shared dinners, of walks by the lake, and of taking care of Lily together. "Step aside, beginner," she said warmly, winking at him. While they were having breakfast, Lily was happily chattering about the ducks they had seen at the lake the day before. Alexander was watching the two women in his life. He watched as Grace wiped a spot of syrup from Lily's chin with infinite tenderness, and as Lily looked at her with absolute adoration. He thought about Victoria. He hadn't thought about her in weeks. His lawyers had taken care of everything. By showing the video to her family and threatening to make it public, Victoria had signed a confidentiality agreement and disappeared from the country, probably looking for another unwary millionaire on the French Riviera. But Alexander no longer cared about the past. He only cared about the present. "Daddy," Lily said suddenly with her mouth full. "Tell me, Princess, is she going to go home today?" The question fell on the table, stopping the forks in the air. Although Grace lived there, technically there was still an invisible barrier. Lily had a residual fear that Grace would disappear like the last time. Alexander looked at Grace. She looked down at her plate, blushing slightly. "No, my love," Alexander said in a firm voice. "Grace is never going to leave. Not today, not tomorrow." "Promise?" Lily insisted. Alexander put down his fork, wiped his mouth with the napkin, and stood up. "Grace, can you walk me to the dock for a moment? Mrs. Higgins can keep an eye on Lily while she finishes her pancakes." Grace nodded, noticing a change in Alexander's tone. There was a nervous solemnity in his voice that made her pulse quicken. They walked together to the wooden pier that jutted out into the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the blue sky like a perfect mirror. The air smelled of pine trees and fresh water. They reached the end of the pier and stopped, looking at the horizon. Alexander kept his hands in his pockets, looking at the water, searching for the exact words. A month ago, in this very place, I almost made the biggest mistake of my life, he started without looking at her. I was blind. I thought life was about control, about image, about having the perfect house and the right trophy wife. I thought I could buy my happiness with expensive toys and renowned doctors. He turned to Grace, who was looking at him with big, expectant eyes, the wind playing with the loose strands of her dark hair. You taught me to see, Grace. You taught me that happiness is not bought. It is built. It is built with silly songs, with cleaning games, with patience, and with true love. You gave me my daughter back. You gave me back the ability to feel. Alexander, I just did, Grace began to say with humility. No, don't say you just did your job, he interrupted her gently, taking a step towards her, shortening the distance. What you did was to save both of us, and that is why I have to tell you something very serious. Alexander took a deep breath as if he were about to jump into the icy water. You are fired. Grace froze, the color drained from her face. She felt the ground move under her feet. What? What? She babbled. Why, did I do something wrong? I said you are fired, repeated Alexander. But this time a mischievous and tender smile appeared on his lips. Because I can't let you be my employee anymore. It is unethical. I do not understand. Grace was confused, on the verge of tears. Alexander took one hand out of his pocket. He didn't have a giant, ostentatious diamond ring like the one he'd given Victoria. He had a little blue velvet box, small and discreet. He opened it. Inside was a simple white gold ring with a light blue sapphire, the exact color of Lily's eyes and the color of the lake that surrounded them. It is not ethical for the woman I am madly in love with to serve me coffee or clean my house, Alexander said, his voice trembling slightly. Grace, I don't want you to work for me. I want you to work with me. I want you to build this life next to me, not as the nanny, but as the mistress of this house. As my companion, as the mother that Lily chose with her heart before I did with my reason. Grace put her hands to her mouth, tears gushing from her eyes, but this time they were tears of such pure happiness that it hurt. Alexander, I have nothing. I come from nowhere. I don't fit into your world. You are my world, he answered firmly, taking her hand and slipping the ring on her finger. It fit her perfectly. You filled this empty house. You are the only wealth that matters to me. Grace Ramirez, would you marry this silly millionaire and his naughty daughter? Grace looked at the ring, then looked at Alexander's dark, pleading eyes. She didn't see the boss, she saw the man. Yes, she whispered, and then louder, laughing through tears. Yes, of course I do. Alexander lifted her up in the air, spinning with her on the dock, while Grace laughed with that crystal-clear laugh that had scared the ghosts out of the mansion. They kissed, a long, deep kiss, sealing a promise that didn't need prenuptial agreements. Hey, I want too! A shout was heard from the shore. Lily was coming running across the lawn with a face full of syrup and open arms. Alexander put Grace down, and both of them bent down to receive the impact of the little one, who threw herself on them in a group hug that almost knocked them into the water. We are already a real family? Lily asked, looking from one to the other mischievously. Grace stroked the girl's cheek, then looked at Alexander, interlacing her fingers with his. Yes, my love, we are a real family, and this time, it is forever. Alexander looked toward the house. It no longer looked like a cold mansion. It looked like a home. The sun was shining high in the sky, and for the first time in years, the millionaire did not wish to be anywhere else in the world. He had come home early that fateful day expecting to find a problem, and instead, he had met his destiny. And as the three of them walked back down the pier, laughing and playing to see who stepped on each other's shadows, Alexander knew that this was the best investment of his life. A love that was not listed on the stock market, but that was worth all the gold in the world.